Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for coming to today's research seminar on AI ethics and citizen input in emerging technologies. I have the pleasure of introducing Rafael Mestre. Rafa is a lecturer at the University of Southampton, a Turing Fellow at the Alan Turing Institute in the UK, and also a visiting researcher here at EAI at Northeastern University. He's the co-director of the Center for Democratic Futures and the Ethics and Governance Lead at the Center for Robotics at the University of Southampton. He specializes in the socio-technical evaluation and responsible development of emerging technologies. He currently leads mixed methods projects like Biohybrid Futures, studying biohybrid robotics, and the RAI UK International Partnership, focusing on artificial intelligence, fairness and bias in mental health in collaboration with us here at EAI at Northeastern University. Thank you so much, and there's Rafael.
Hi, thank you, Annika, for the introduction. Thanks everyone for attending this seminar. Well, I won't say much more about me because Annika already said so. My name is Rafael Mestre, and I come from the University of Southampton. I'm going to be talking about AI ethics and citizen input in emerging technologies. So I will divide the seminar in two sections. So I will start talking about how emerging digital or AI tools can help us enhance democratic participation. And then I will link it to the other way around, how we can embed democratic input from people into AI-powered emerging technologies, hoping to make like a loop between both of these things. So I want to start with just some examples from the literature on why these things are important. So we can see this paper here in which they were analyzing candidate voice pitch and its influence on the election outcomes. So we can see here from the, we put the pointer, I think it can be seen, but yeah, we can see from the abstract that they found that men and women prefer to vote for male and female candidates that have lower pitched voices. And when facing male opponents, the candidates with the lower voices won a larger vote share. So people respond differently to persons who have different voice pitch when they're speaking. Similarly, other works have found very similar stuff, how the vocal pitch and the emotional intensity of speakers in congressional speeches can change. For instance, when they're speaking about different topics. So here, female members of Congress speak with greater emotional intensity when they're talking about women as compared with male colleagues when they're speaking about other topics. And the emotional intense speech can affect the lawmakers' behavior. And finally, this is the last example where they analyzed gender and candidate emotional expression during televised debates, focusing both on the pitch, but also on the emotional expressions from the people in the video. And this was focused on the German elections. So they saw that the voters were punishing Angela Merkel for anger displays and rewarding her for happiness and general emotional displays. So basically things that were congruent with her gender, so showing more happiness and less anger, were actually preferred by people. So we can see here how having a different pitch or a different emotional appearance can actually influence how people see the political candidates, and also things like how women who have usually higher pitches, or also men that happen to have a higher pitch, might be in a situation when they are regarded less favorably by people who are watching these speeches. So here, in this round, we can use multimodal analysis, or in particular machine learning technologies that use data from different modalities, in this case text, audio, and video, to analyze all of these different aspects of speeches and get interesting results in what is usually called as computational social science. So for instance, when we have the text, there's generally been lots of work in sentiment analysis and also in factuality, whether if we can find out whether this text contains facts, and also argumentation, which I'll be talking in more depth in a minute. But also we can now, with all these new techniques, we can link it to the audio, because it's not only about what we're saying, but also how we're saying, as I've just shown you from the examples. And one of the clearest examples here is to use the voice pitch to understand the emotional intensity and all the things that we're saying. And then finally, we can also use the video, which obviously comes with the audio, and then we can analyze the faces, the emotional expression, whether showing more happiness or angry faces or neutral expressions, and also the body language can also be analyzed to understand how people are conveying different messages. So I'm going to be focusing at the beginning now on only the text, and then we'll see how we can jump into the other modalities. I will focus in the case study of argumentation. So argumentation is a really old field of research. You need to go back to Aristotle. He was talking already about arguments and how we can make persuasive arguments and so on. And it's something that links from philosophy to social political science and now computer science as well. And as you can imagine, it's something that people still do not agree on. Like, what is an argument? What are the parts of an argument? How do you link different arguments together? Only in the last 50 years, 60 years, there have been so many different framework or schemes to deal with different arguments in debates, in deliberations, and so on. We have the new rhetoric, Stallman's model, Walton models, it's so many of them. So you can imagine when we try to approach this from computer science and maybe try to detect through text different arguments and put them together, it becomes a really complicated task. And it's still far, even with the latest advances, it's still very far from being understood. So in computer science, usually talk about argumentation mining or argument mining. And there are different, as I said, many different ways to approach this field, but usually contains two different tasks. One of them is to detect an argument. So you have a text, a paragraph, a speech from someone, and you want to know whether that sentence has an argument. Usually you can subdivide it into two tasks, like whether the sentence has an argument, and then also the boundary of the argument. So whether the argument is the whole sentence, or it's just a clause, or it's just a little part of it. This is a really complicated thing, and it's so subjective that really there are no good models or techniques to do this. But once you have found whether that sentence contains an argument and you're interested in it or not, then you can predict the type of argument or the structure. And again, completely different schemes and modalities to do this. But usually one of the ones that's commonly used is whether it's a claim or a premise. So basically you have a claim, something that you're claiming, and then you can support that claim with certain premises, which can be also in contact with one another. And at the end, when you end up is with some sort of maps where you have, for instance, these circles would be different arguments. For instance, A3 is supporting A1, which in turn is attacking A2, which is also attacking A3. So you can see how we can make these different maps and have a representation of a problem that someone's trying to solve through a debate or a decision making, and it can help a little bit rationalize the whole thing and maybe reach a decision in an easier way. I will go back to these argument maps and why they are important in a minute, but I just want to show an example of how this looks like in a more practical way. So for instance, we can have a claim, which in this case could be, we should use nuclear energy. And then that claim, we can support it, for instance, with a premise, which is nuclear energy has a large capacity of energy production and makes 20% of US energy generation. So that should be a premise that supports this claim. But then we can also attack it. We can say, well, nuclear disasters like Chernobyl or Fukushima cause a lot of harm. So that's attacking the notion or the claim that we should use nuclear energy. And these two obviously are also attacking one another. So you can imagine this at a larger scale with a more complicated topic, adding more and more. And this could, in theory, help a little bit develop some critical thinking and rationalize the discussion to reach a decision more easier. So in computer science, so there's lots of work in computational mining trying to create models that can automatically extract these arguments and form these maps. And there was this good work in which it took all of the US televised presidential debates from the 1960 to 2016 at that point. And they annotated manually by experts what parts were arguments and what type of arguments they were. And they trained some machine learning text-based classifiers to try to detect the arguments and also the boundaries. I'm going to show only the part of the arguments, but you can see here just a highlight that results were sort of okay. So for the class of arguments, they could achieve it with certain precision. It was not that good at finding the sentences that were not really an argument. And this was only with LSTM networks, which were even before they started to use BERT-based models and language models and so on. But this obviously has a lot to be improved. So what we did here, this is where I start now introducing some results, is that we took, what if we now add the audio of these debates, which are freely available all over, and we try to see whether adding audio in not only relying on the text and potentially relying on some emotional intensity that can change the way in which we convey a message on an argument can actually improve the detection of the arguments. So we tried to add all the videos to see what happened. So for this, we used multimodal models. As said before, these combine, in this case, text and audio. We're not including video of any sort here. And we had different text-based modules. We have, for instance, a BERT-based module, which was simply considering the text, then the same with a BiLSTM, also the text. And we also had an audio module, which was receiving as a raw input the audio, having some feature extraction, and then two parallel pipelines. One of them that had convolutional neural networks, so it was trying to find patterns in the spectrum, in the spectrogram of the frequencies and other features, and then one that was based on BiLSTM and was trying to find temporal features in the audio that we were giving. And then finally, we had the multimodal model that was combining both things. So we had the text and the audio, we concatenate together, and then we have a final classification on the arguments. Just playing very briefly something about the features that we're extracting for the audio. So right now, actually, there's lots of audio encodings that can be used in the same way that you can use text encodings like BERT and so on. Now we have WAV2BEG and other similar audio encodings. At this time, were not so readily available. So we're using more handcrafted features, or what they are known as low-level descriptors. So these are features like MFCCs, which are mel frequency cepstral coefficients. These are some coefficients that you can extract from the audio file, which reflect a little bit how we hear in our own auditory system. So they are like really good for classification tasks with audio. But then you can have all the features, like I will not go into detail, but like spectral centroids, bandwidth rollout. These are basic statistical operations that you can do on the audio file that collect some features that look something like this, and that can be useful in order to, pick up these features from the audio that might give you a better classification. So we basically put all of these features together. We extract them manually. So this is, again, no encodings, no anything, just these handcrafted features, and you can learn some spatiotemporal patterns of these audio features using both convolutional neural networks and BiLSTM. What we found when doing the first classification, I'm only going to highlight here two of the results, was like when we're using the text-only modules, only BERT, we had kind of an okay, pretty good performance, especially compared with considering the difficulty of this task, the subjectivity of it. Like there's really not much that we can do. But actually, when we added the audio, it didn't really improve. This was with hyperparameter tuning, so it was optimized, but actually was not improving that much. So we're a little bit baffled. This could be potentially because already the text-only performance was already plateauing. There's really not much that you can improve because it's so subjective. The annotations were obviously not going to be perfect, even though they were done by experts. So there's really not much you can improve. So it's like, what happens if we actually go to a scenario where we have less data and we know that the text-based models, it tend to perform a little bit worse, because with BERT encodings, you usually need to provide it more data for it to perform well. And we just went to 10% of the full data set, which is really, really few data points for this particular type of task. And then we find that then in this case, the BERT-based model, it starts to perform poorly compared to the other one. But actually the multimodal one, which is including both the text and the audio at the same time, is performing even better than before. So actually, we reduced a scenario in which we have scarce data, which is a very common scenario in this type of case of application. and actually adding the audio it's making you not need so much data, because it's starting to pick up some of the audio cues that we still don't even know exactly. It's still work in progress. We don't know what particular part of the audio is focusing on, but it's actually improving, and it's making it much better than what it was before, with 28,000 data points, and improving the performance of the BERT model. So we can see how adding audio actually it's adding some information. It's still unknown exactly which one, but it seems to be an improvement. And there are more things that we can do. This is just a couple of interesting slides that not really much on machine learning, but I found them really interesting. So we can do some speech characterization, which is of interest for political science in general, computational social science. This is not about getting a model to perform better. It's just more interesting results for other type of research questions. But for instance, we can analyze the average pitch of the people who are talking in the debates. And you can see here, this is from the first ever debate that was televised in the US by from Kennedy and Nixon. And you can see here with the colors, you can assume, you can imagine who they are. Now it's legend here. And you can see how this is the average pitch. So if you see a fluctuation, that means that they are getting maybe emotionally intense. So they are increasing their pitch, and this they're normalized by their average pitch. So it should be pretty much constant. And this is completely normal. Now, if you compare it to one of the last debates in 2016 or 2020, yeah, in 2020, this is what happens. So you can see how, first of all, they are showing much more short speeches because they were constantly interrupting each other. You all know that very well. You can see all these little peaks here of high emotional intensity because they were basically fighting all the time with each other. And this already reflects the differences between the speaking style of debates that were happening 60 years ago, more than 60 years ago, and what's happening right now. Well, it's almost self-explanatory, at least for this type of talk, but this can have lots of very interesting, they can give you lots of interesting tools and results to analyze more debates in general in political science. Another interesting one is that you can use this audio to do emotion recognition. So as I said before, we were using the audio just to see if we could improve a little bit the performance of the models. Now here we're just applying some off-the-shelf models, this time based on these audio embeddings, in this case Watt2Vec2, which can help you classify an utterance with a certain emotion labels. And in this case, they were angry, happy, neutral, and sad. This is obviously very reductionist. Nothing is as simple as that, but this is the state of the art of these models right now. But you can see here, these are all of the debates from 1960 to 2020, and the distribution of labels that were found in that debate. So as you can see, only two of them are basically there, angry or neutral. This is really interesting because we could understand that most of them are neutral. Would be weird to have sad ones or maybe happy ones. Angry, okay, we could understand, but some of them are really, really high, like this one here. The last debate on the 1960s, like 90% of the labels were angry. I don't think that's true. Like political candidates, they might be speaking with a very dominant speaking style or like very confident, but they're definitely not angry when they are on television talking to one another. It might happen, but it's not going to be most of the time. So you can already notice that these models are actually not really working that well, or at least not, it clashes a little bit with our understanding. And if you look at the candidates that's shown, the ones that have different percentage of angry labels in their speaking, you can see how, for instance, Anderson and Hillary Clinton have almost 100% of their utterances as angry. Again, this is interesting because I don't think they're angry 100% of the time when they're talking. At the same time, there are other ones like Lieberman, Carter, or Cheney, which are known to have a very like a soft voice, are not very dominant when they're speaking. They're actually shown that they're never angry. So you can already see here some biases that's maybe mistreating not so favorably some speakers who are like more dominant in their speaking style, like Hillary Clinton. And if we look at other models, This one is a little bit more complex, and it's based on this valence arousal dominance framework, which divides the emotions. We have this comes from psychology, and you can have different emotions that can be a combination of this valence, arousal, or dominance. So these are all very well used in psychology, political psychology, and so on. And you can see again in the dominance axis, you can see how Clinton and Anderson appear as some of the most dominant ones, and then Carter, Lieberman, and Cheney appears as some of the lower dominant ones. The same with arousal. You have Clinton appears here, Anderson appears here again, and very low arousal, you have Cheney. So he's already telling you that they just have different speaking styles. Some of them are more dominant, they are speaking like maybe more with more emotional intensity, with more arousal, and that's picked up by these models as being angry. And this difference, it can, as I said at the beginning, that people react differently to different pitches. Of women who have a higher pitch, sometimes people do not see it so favorably, or in the case of Angela Merkel, that people were rewarding her for showing more congruent emotions like happiness instead of anger. This is already painting a very complex and interacting picture of all of these things. And in these models are already biasing all the classifications, and we just believe them as they come. And in this case, this can be could be problematic. So more complex models like this one, the valence, arousal, dominance, they can help us. We extend the notion of this, sentiment analysis, as it was usually done for text, into a more complex picture, and it can help us disentangle all of these biases. So yeah, what I wanted to say here pretty much sums up these parts. Like computational social science or computer science also in general needs an ethics. They need to go hand by hand, and we need to make sure that we understand all of these problems and biases, because these technologies are not neutral, even though we think they are, because they reproduce the biases that we are introducing without even noticing. And there are lots of forms of discrimination and inequalities that we might be trying to solve with these tools, but we're actually reproducing them and amplifying them at times, just because we're not paying enough attention to the results. And now I want to show a practical example, and I'm gonna go back to the argumentation part, in which we show how this notion of argumentation or argument mapping or argument mining can be useful to enhance democratic processes. So just introduce briefly some important notions. So this comes from research in democracy in political science. So in deliberative democracy, so there's notion that political discussion in any form that it can, in any place that it can happen, it should come from an equal dialogue between people who are just exchanging reasons, arguments, and they are happy to revisit their own opinions, their own viewpoints when they hear other people's. So that should be the notion when you're like in parliament, but also in smaller discussion deliberations between people, in assemblies, in any kind of democratic process. But as I just said before, and the same with technology, even if we're trying to do our best, there's still forms of discrimination and hierarchies and power dominance. They still happen, and they're still reproduced in these settings. And there's people from marginalized groups that are often not heard. And during this process, they can be even less heard, just because they're not present, just because they are dominated by other people who are speaking more. And yeah, in general, even if they're present, they might be not as heard as they might. So lots of very important research questions in this field are about who is involved and when are they involved, when decisions are being made collectively in democracy, and also how are they involved. So what is an effective participation between people? How can ordinary citizens take part in these discussions? And who has a voice, and what are the consequences of what decisions are made for governance in general. So as a starting point, well, there are many ways in which you could try and solve these problems, and there's lots of research to getting people from marginalized communities are often not heard to be heard in these processes. But I'm going to show one example which can be powered by technology, which is on argument mapping. So argument mapping, I'll go back to what I said before. Remember that we have different arguments, we can put them together, and it can be something like this, and not intending that you read anything that's there just to show how it looks like. I don't even know what it says, to be honest. But you can see you have a main point of discussion, and you can have different arguments that are connected to one another. The ones in green are supporting that claim, the ones in red are opposing. Then you can have like a tree and branches that emerge from that. So you can actually then collect this from a discussion, a deliberation, a decision that needs to be made, and it can help know where you are and reach a decision collectively and hear all the viewpoints. And this can help for people who are doing it. It can enhance critical thinking. It can make you consider other viewpoints a little bit easier. You don't forget them because they're already there. So it has a lot of benefits. Obviously, it complexifies the whole thing. It looks very complex, but it has some trade-offs that actually it seems like it could be in benefit for reaching a more equal decision. So we tried this, doing this argument mapping in an actual process. So this was a project where we was commissioned by a UK select committee. So these are cross-party committees that are in the House of Commons in the UK that they talk about different, that they're focused on different aspects. So this one was focused on justice, and they just need to inform the House of Commons about certain things that are what they have inquiries that they're interested about certain topics, what people feel about them, and they just create reports and inform the rest of the Parliament. So this one was on sentencing, on the Justice Select Committee, and they were interested in the views of sentencing of the population. They wanted to change some things. They wanted to see what happened, what they think about that, what they think the priorities of people are regarding sentencing in general. So we organized this thing in collaboration with Involve, which is a public participation charity in the US, but it was from the Rebooting Democracy Project with whom I collaborate. So we had 28 people over 3 half-day sessions online, only from England and Wales, because that's the regions they were interested in. And this was a mini public, as they call them, which is a sort of democratic innovation in which you put people together to deliberate about a certain topic, like that you inform them very well about the topic. So even if you don't know really anything about sentencing, more than people go to jail, you can actually get lots of information, be informed, and you, from your point of view, with a stratified sample that's collecting all the different demographics of the countries. You have people from different ages, genders, and ethnicities, and so on, to give their input after receiving the information about a certain topic. And here we used this argument mapping as an exercise to see if that improved reaching the decision. And this, we believe this is the first time that's been done like synchronously. I actually wrote here asynchronous, but it's synchronous. So it has been done asynchronously many times in forums. So instead of like writing in a forum, you write in an argument map, stuff like that, but never been done like synchronously, and at least in a live process like this one. So for this, we used the Deliberatorium. This is actually a tool software that was created by Mark Klein here, well, not here, but like in Boston at MIT. And it looks something like this. This is an actual screenshot from part of it in this dialogue. So you can see how you can have different questions with then have different ideas, and people can support or attack certain notions. So for instance, we have the example here where there was a claim that was sentencing should take into account the public's opinion. There was lots of discussion about this, whether you should actually consider what the media is saying or what the public is saying on Twitter and stuff like that. And there were people saying, yeah, because that could be a form of achieving democratic consensus. Other people were like, no, we should not take into account the public's opinion because people don't talk about sentencing enough. So we don't really have enough data about that. But they can be supported by, yeah, actually people talk about the individual cases, but not about the judicial system as a whole. So you see, this can form like very complicated trees. and it can help put everything out there and then reach a decision in a better way. So this, and I want to be clear, this was just the argument map. We were using this tool, this digital tool, for help, but it did not include any machine learning or anything like that. It was all done like manually, because as I said at the beginning, it's still really far to be able to collect all these arguments with enough precision to be able to do it like that. I have here just some of the examples of the effects that it can have. So for instance, we found after interviews with people that the argument mapping, it helped draw the attention of contributions from participants that were less confident, people who were in a minority, and usually they're a little bit more shy, don't want to speak that much. So it creates a more equal deliberation. So this is a quote from one of the participants, and they were saying, having that structure automatically makes other people respect your points in the discussion a bit more. People can't just skirt around or steamroll it, because it's there, it's been said, it's been collected. You will not be ignored because it's just placed there. In a normal deliberation, a discussion, people might be on purpose or not ignoring you a little bit more. So this is one of the positive effects. Then the facilitators were helping. So these are expert facilitators who are trained to actually facilitate the deliberation. They were obviously present and working with us. And they said that the argument mapping, it created a space for collective reflection, and it separated the contributions from the contributors. So it depersonalized the arguments. So they were saying something like, there was something about being able to point to an idea or a thought that wasn't pointing at a person. It was more looking at the text and scrutinizing. So it gave us a lot to play with that felt very democratic and more cooperative. So this means that once you put your argument out there, it's just not yours anymore. You know, it goes to the map. It stops being yours. So when you're discussing, I'm not discussing about you and your argument. I'm discussing about the argument. So I'm not really pointing at you, and opens a space for a more equal deliberation between people. This obviously has pros and cons. So as I said, it could make people more reflective, more self-critical of their own arguments, because also in the same way that I'm not personally attacking you, I don't really care if they're attacking my argument because it's not me. So you feel a little bit more depersonalized, and it can create a more equal space. But you could say that sometimes you might want to make this personal. You might actually want, especially if you want to break like dominance and power plays, you might actually want to make it more personal. So there's obviously some cons about that, and it might overshadow other things like narrative or storytelling, something that's not really an argument, but it's still important for the conversation because it might not be collected. But there could be room for opening this up and collecting them. So yeah, some midway conclusion. So as I said, this was done only with the map. We did not use any automatic tools to do it, but that's the dream. That's where we want it to go. So we've seen how these novel multimodal machine learning models, they could allow us to understand these nuanced aspects of political speech or just speech in general. But we have lots of important questions about biases, which as we have seen, they can be about gender, they can be about accents. It's very clear, like if you've been in a Zoom meeting or a Teams meeting, you've seen how people with accents sometimes are not recorded in the transcript that well. And there's lots of issues with the representation that we have in the data. And then we have seen how this could be applied to argument mapping, which could help people consider different viewpoints for underrepresented groups. But there's still no AI-powered solution, even though we can see there's a clear gap there where it can be used. Not even with the LLMs right now. Still haven't been able, no one, to bridge this gap and try to maybe come up with a solution that when you are discussing something with someone, it's just picking up the arguments and identifying them and actually organizing them in a way so it can help with the discussion. Right now, it just needs to be done by hand with people. So we hope that's something that can go there. But we need to be very careful with all of these problems around biases and so on. So yeah, as I said at the beginning, I wanted to talk about how these emerging digital or AI tools could enhance democratic participation, but I also wanted to relate it and turn it around, say, how can we actually get people to give democratic input into these tools, emerging tools that are being developed, and that sometimes it's just thrown into our faces and we cannot really do much about them. So This relates very well to the concept of RRI, responsible research and innovation. Probably many, if not all, are very familiar with it because it's becoming a bit of a buzzword. Although that's older than its recent application in AI, it's been obviously researched for a long time in technologies in general. And this RRI basically asks us to consider the bigger picture of what we're doing. So not only focusing on our little model, our little performance, but consider the impacts, and especially the long-term impacts and the value that it can bring to society, but also how it could go the other way around and have detrimental impacts in society. And one important seminal paper here, says I think it's 2013, not 2023, I believe. It was like 15 years old. It was a book chapter actually, but it's been picked up by funding agencies in the European Union, in the UK, I'm not sure, but probably maybe in the US. And it basically has 3 key points that tells us that responsible research and innovation should have ethical acceptability, sustainability in mind, and societal desirability. So it should be desirable by society and people should have a say in that. And there are many different frameworks for this. So I'm just highlighting one of them. This is one from the EPSRC, which is the Engineering and Physical Sciences Research Council in the UK, which funds lots of research in anything related to engineering, physical sciences, computer science, IT, and so on. And it's called the AREA framework. And it tells you should do 4 things. Anticipate, so describe and analyze the impacts that are intended or maybe not intended. So you should think about what could go wrong that I'm just not even thinking about at the moment. To reflect on them. So what's the purpose of research and motivation and the potential implications? And again, all of these unknowns that might happen and the assumptions that we have about them. Then you should engage, so open up your discussion to other stakeholders, whether it's society, citizens, industry, policymakers, who should be having a say, who, if you're doing something that's medical research, should we involve practitioners, hospitals, patients, and then act, not do like a unidirectional conversation, which is more outreach, so you're just explaining them, but also to get their input. So it should be bi-directional, get your input, act, and do something that can inform your own research, and in theory that should be for the good because you want it to be useful, so you should hear what people think it's useful for them and then embed it into your own research. So just to finish, I'll give like a snapshot of 3 projects that are around this theme of RRI for emerging technologies, which could be many of them amplified and powered by all these AI advancements that we don't even foresee at the moment because we don't know. They might just amplify completely the research and we don't know what to do with it. So the first one is the one that brings me here. So this is the RA for mental health project. So this is a project from Responsible AI UK, which is a big scheme consortium from the UK that's led from the University of Southampton, like 33 or 31 million pounds to create an ecosystem of responsible research for AI and also make international links. So this is the international partnership grant, me and Annika just introduced me. And we are exploring fairness and bias of AI applied in mental health. So as I was saying, we have industry stakeholders. We're going to be engaging with people, and it's more about thinking how we can apply responsibly AI in mental health, which is such a critical setting. So what we'll be doing is research on bias and fairness of machine learning models, or more on the computer science type of research, but we're also organizing workshops with stakeholders, inviting people from industry, policymaking, academia to talk about what it means to do responsible AI there and hear their voices. And also policy engagement to understand what are the policies around the use of AI in mental health, what needs to change, what's already there to be able to get ahead of all the regulations and potential things that might make all this progress go faster or slower or something. like that. So this is a snapshot. This is something I literally just started like 2 months ago. So it's still work in progress, but hopefully like 1 year and a half. When it finishes, we have some really nice results. Another snapshot of another project is completely different. But again, that's an interesting thing about this, that we have these emerging technologies that people have heard nothing about, and it's biohybrid robotics. So biohybrid robots, if it works, this is an emergent field of research in which people want to use biological entities like muscle tissue, actual muscle tissue grown in the lab, with some artificial components. You put them together and you create something hybrid that can be powered by the biological components. So in this case, you can see this in white. This is a flexible polymer, completely artificial, and this here around in pink is muscle tissue. It's muscle grown in the lab, and it can contract, it can be powered, and you can see here how it's moving, just in the same way that our muscles contract when we have electrical stimulation by our brain or our neural system. These electrodes here are creating, are stimulating and making it move. And people are working on making it more and more complex, adding neurons, adding other types of tissue. And you can imagine people always tell me, Terminator, Blade Runner, that sort of thing. Obviously, that's a very science fiction way of it, but there's research going into making robotic systems that are somehow hybrid, because these, biological things have been optimized by millions and millions of years of evolution. So they're much more efficient in many different ways that whatever we do artificially. One of the reasons why I put it here is because the example on the right, this was one done in Northeastern University in Illinois, where they used AI to find the best designs to create their biohybrids. They call it xenobots, because it came from the cells that they were using were from frogs, and the name was like xeno something. So they called them xenobots, and AI was used to design it in the most efficient way so that you achieve the best motion. And this made the headlines. I mean, it makes it every now and then, but made the headlines like, oh, self-replicating, yeah, because they were also self-replicating in theory. So will self-replicating xenobots cure diseases, yield new bioweapons, or simply turn the whole world into gray goo? Not really sure what it meant there. But meet the xenobots, virtual creatures brought to life. The world's first living robot can now reproduce. All these sorts of things. And people were saying, people will ask, is it a robot? Is it a machine? Is it an animal? What is it? And then an uneducated public may see this as Frankenstein-like. And regulators, scientists, and society should carefully weigh up the risks and rewards. This is already calling, this is in the media calling for, people want to know about this. They want to know what it is. They want to know, is it Frankenstein or what is it? And regulators, scientists, ethicists, they all should work together to try and figure this thing out. So yeah, it raises lots of interesting questions on how can citizens give input into the development of this emerging technology, or many others, obviously, that are going to affect them directly, following these principles of RRI. And this, it becomes really difficult when you consider there's this unknown nature of the technology. People don't even know that it exists because it's just in the lab right now, but it could grow super quickly and then just suddenly be a reality. And we didn't have time to think about it. And that's it, like our technological imaginaries of what it means. If you tell someone biohybrid robotics, they don't know what you're saying because they never heard of it. Maybe they read this article and they know, but when you explain it, they will think about Terminator, about Blade Runner, which is not really it, at least not at the moment. And again, also with policymakers, how can we get ahead of all the regulations that might be needed to, make these things safe for people and for industries, and avoid moral panics that might happen with people, path dependencies, things that are already too late to be changed because they're already in the middle of some process. And policymaking is very reactionary. It will only change something when it's already in their faces, because policymakers and government, they like to think sometimes very short term within their term. So they're not going to think about something in 20 years when they're not even going to be in office anymore. Usually, just generalizing, but it tends to happen like that. And what if AI powered solutions, like as in this case, that if they applied AI for the design, could revolutionize the development of these technologies, and at a pace that's unprecedented and which is not ready for what might happen. So this is what we're trying to understand a little bit in this project, Biohybrid Futures, which is also just recently started a few months ago, in which we are using mixed methods research, so research from different fields, to try and gather some insights into all these processes. So we're doing socio-technical scenarios and trying to come up, speaking with experts, what could be a scenario that might happen in like 20 years time, where this could this technology go according to the experts who are working on it right now, because we could imagine it the ones who are not experts, but those are the ones who should know better about it. Ethical analysis, interviews with the experts, with people, deliberative workshops to people to come to decisions about what we should do with this, policy analysis, surveys, etc., to hopefully have some insights or conclusions about how we should approach these sort of emerging technologies. And then finally, just in the last 2 minutes, in the last snapshot, this is about another technology emerging called distributed fiber optic sensing. So the concepts of this technology, this is from an infographic from another project of a colleague, but it's basically using optical fibers. As you know, they are the fibers that are sending or getting us internet and communication. So optical fibers just work by sending light pulses that reflect and just get transmitted. But what if we could use these fibers for sensing? So instead of sending information, we send light pulses, and then we look at the backscattered light. And if there's more disturbances in the cable, for instance, by pressure, sound, vibration, they can actually be detected. And instead of sending information, we are collecting information about the different environment all over the fiber. So here's the concept of fiber optic sensing, and it's extremely sensitive to very low frequencies, to very high frequencies, very short times, very long times. Spatial sensitivity can go from less than a meter along the whole fiber. It's extremely sensitive to all sorts of vibrations. It's already successfully used in oil rings by companies who want to see what's the status or the integrity of the oil rings, for environmental applications to detect earthquakes that go at very low frequencies. And here it can be used to detect whales, volcanoes, shapes, all these sorts of things. But lots of people are saying, what if it could be used in cities? So smart cities, we have so many optical fibers laying around. Many of them are unused. They call them dark fibers or legacy fibers. As you know, the whole world is full of fibers all over. What if we could repurpose this to do this sensing, and it could help with traffic monitoring? You could see how traffic is going without cameras, and it could give you information about that. Perimeter monitoring to detect intruders in different places, to detect the structural integrity of buildings, sound pollution. It can detect vibration, so it could detect what's sound in general, so you know which zones are more sound polluted than others without specific sensors. For environmental monitoring, as I said, so many things that they are proposing by companies and some academics who are working on this. It has many interesting implications. What about privacy? Could they hear conversations? Don't know. They're very sensitive, but they are underground, but maybe some of them are inside houses. We don't know how this could play out. What about data ownership? If all of this data is used for this, like who owns that? Local spatial inequalities. Cities are very unequal. And is this technology would be applied in all the areas of the city or all in the richest one? And then you have a huge and amplified inequality between the regions. What about sustainability? Is it actually worth it in terms of like climate change and all that to do this, or is it going to be worse at the end? So we got a new project which cannot really talk much about right now because it's embargoed at the moment, but it's more or less following the same principles as the other ones that I explained before. So what we will do here is to have a citizen panel at the beginning where people are going to set the research priority. So there's so many potential applications here. Some of them really good, some of them a little bit sketchy. We should be careful with them. Maybe people are interested about the really positive ones, or maybe they're more scared and they want to really understand the negative consequences first. We will let them decide what research priorities. And then we will actually do this sensing, distributed sensing in cities with these legacy fibers and do research around it. Research that will be inter and transdisciplinary. So we'll have people from physical sciences, political science, arts, AI, human geography, ethics, all working together to try and solve those problems with an interdisciplinary perspective. And transdisciplinary, which means also engaging with local communities, activists, because it's in the cities. So people who live in the cities should have a say, with policymakers, with the general public, with industry who are providing these solutions. We're all in conversation around that. But this is something that will start in a few months. Like I said, I don't really kind of give much information about the project itself. But yeah, I hope these were 3 snapshots of projects where we can get democratic input into these AI-powered technologies. And honestly, the key takeaways are, again, this thing that we can have its potential of these digital and AI tools to enhance democratic participation. They are very good. We really need to be careful of all these biases and all the ethical implications of unfair utilization of them. And also to can turn it around and think of how learning from all of these moral panics with generative AI and all of the things that are happening right now, can we actually get people to give input into the development of these emerging technologies early in the process, which is not an easy task, and there's not really frameworks to do it, because one of the problems of being emerging is like it's not there, so we don't know about it. It's obviously complicated, but there's things that we can use following these principles of RRI. And yeah, I think that's it. Thank you so much for listening.
Well, let's thank Rafa for an excellent talk. We did have some questions online. The first one is really a technical question regarding the audio plus BERT experiments. And the question really is that it's surprising there's such a big difference when data is reduced. Doesn't that sound counterintuitive? For example, higher dimensions and less samples could actually result in overfitting.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, it is counterintuitive. We were surprised, but the thing is, we're still completely unsure what parts of the audio is focusing on. So there's been some works, for instance, from Wab to Beck, from the people at Meta who developed this thing. They did a really good job at analyzing like biases and different genders and stuff like that. And they actually found that the audio embeddings are actually capable of getting some semantic understanding of some of the words. So it's actually possible that it's just picking up some semantic information and understanding when you're talking about something that looks more like an argument than another. It could be obviously overfitting and all that, but we did a whole hyperparameter tuning. So everything was done, repeated several times. We had standard deviation. So it was no variability of the model. It was, the thing was overfitting because we tested with all the tuning of the hyperparameters. So I do not believe that was an issue, but yeah, it's a little bit counterintuitive. But what I believe is that when you have the text and the audio and there's enough data for the text to perform well, that's going to be more efficient. It's just going to learn to predict with the text and it's not going to listen to the audio. And once you reduce the data and you have less information about text and the BERT encoding starts to perform poorly, then it's when the audio is going to start and play. So it's not really like it was counterintuitive, more like it was already good enough. So it was not improving to be made until you reduce it and you put it in a bad position. And then it will actually start to show its potential.
There was a follow-up question on this, which was, did you try to just use audio in that experiment? But that was just audio anyway, wasn't it?
No, the one that performed better was multimodal, was both. We did use audio. It should be, it's in the paper. It actually did not perform so well by itself. So it actually does need the text. By itself, at least in that particular scenario, was not performing good enough. But once you add the text to it, in conjunction, they work pretty well.
Awesome. We have an audience questions as well.
So yeah, I'm going to repeat it. Just yeah. So you were asking if we would try with contrastive learning.
Yeah, like for instance, contrastive learning using audio and language, like cloud.
No, that was like a couple of years ago. But yeah, that's actually a really interesting suggestion. But yeah, no, we didn't try that. The point.
Another question, watching from the US, thank you for sharing this work. Given the current political climate in the US, I am curious about how we can ensure that citizen input is representative and not biased or skewed by special interest groups or vocal minorities. As a layperson, it can be challenging sometimes to determine what is a vocal minority message versus some change in broader societal values.
Yeah, that's well a hot question and topic. Like there's no simple answer for that. Like I'm not obviously an expert in US politics, so I'm in the UK, and that's the setting in which I work. There is so at a big scale, at a large scale of a whole country, it's really difficult to do that because there's so much demographic difference between people. But what research has shown, especially in this field they call democratic innovations, where it's trying to find different ways of engaging with democracy that are just novel in the context or in the place. It's like many times you need to go local. And then from those local processes, trying to influence the global or the large scale one. So if you're doing it local, it's obviously easier to address all of these differences between people, and then have people who have different that are from a minority underrepresented to actually provide some input. So you have examples like these citizens assemblies. I don't think they're so common in the US. I really don't know that much about what they do, how they do it here, but they are more and more common, at least in Europe, in the UK, in the global South, especially about climate. So which actually just organized one last year in Southampton, where I'm coming from, with us Southampton Climate Assembly. We have people put together representing whole city to give input into the new transport plant of the city that was reaching towards net zero and all of that. So they were actually providing their input as people who live there for that. That, as you can imagine, there have been several attempts of doing these things at a large scale in the whole country, but it's a significant thing to do because it's really difficult to represent all of these communities in different cities and so on. I don't know if I'm completely answered, but yeah, it's difficult. That's a summary.
I think this is probably going to be our last question, but we had many more excellent questions. So if you want to email Rafa, you can do this too. Yep. Thank you for an excellent, insightful talk. The citizens panel are a great idea. I suppose at the moment these are UK focused. Can these go global at some point? In fact, I'd be interested to participate in the biorobot ones.
Yeah, I mean, so yeah, there's, as I said, there's so many initiatives of these panels happening all over the world, and there's this network called Participedia. That's maybe should have put them there. They were not involved in that in public. We're involved with them. This is a Canadian project with people from all over the world, and they do so many initiatives, usually with local communities, and they try to do also with at larger scale. And so yeah, it's not only UK's based. Like ones I talked about were, well, the one I talked about was because I'm there, but they're happening all over the world, and there's lots of people doing great work about that.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. Of course, if you're interested, you can always subscribe to our newsletter and stay up to date with any future events. Thank you so much for coming, everyone.